Well, the Gary Summers, at the last minute, agreed to take this subject, building better Bible schools, and write the manuscript and then speak on the subject. Appreciate him for that. He contacted his educational director and one of the programs and part of the work that they're doing there, and he's going to be presenting that during the open forum session. But Brother Summers is going to be speaking on the aspect of building better Bible schools. He did a terrific job this morning in the lesson that he presented. And know that this one will be likewise, but how important is the Bible schools that we have? So many times it's more of an afterthought than anything else. And some religious groups have realized you build the church through the Bible school. And to a great extent, that's going to be the case even with the church. We are going to build the church through the Bible school and by using it. And so we need to learn to build a better Bible school. And so Brother Summers is going to be speaking on that subject this hour.
When Michael said that their speaker was not going to be coming on this topic, I was really upset for two reasons. One, because I've already proofread the manuscript. But the second reason was I just could not imagine not having material on this subject. It's just too important. And so I volunteered to write and asked Jeff if he would contribute some stuff, and he threw himself enthusiastically into it. And you'll see his presentation next hour, and it will be really informative and instructive as to how we're doing some of the things that we're doing. So we really think this is an important subject, and I'm grateful to be able to speak on it, grateful to be able to be here this week. I've always appreciated this congregation for a number of years and the work that you're doing. Well, is everyone ready to eat? All the youngsters nodded. Appetizer pretzels were passed around, followed by popcorn, accompanied by Mountain Dew. Samples of different types of fudge were next circulated, and then potato chips. Next came the pumpkin pie, the pecan pie, cherry pie, followed by cheese curls to kind of round it off a little bit. Chocolate cake and caramel fudge ice cream went next, and then finally some cashews, pecans, and almonds were passed around. Dessert wouldn't be for about an hour, and it would consist of an assortment of Krispy Kreme donuts. Well, this diet consists of just about all the yummy food groups that you can imagine, but very few would call it healthy. Now, this may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but a consistent diet of junk food, pastries, and desserts is somewhat similar to what we have in our Bible school curriculums in many cases. Yeah, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not as far as you might think. The church literature, quote unquote, that brethren are using is basically warmed over denominational table scraps. Few series are actually produced by brethren. Many of the lessons concentrate on the sweet portions of the Scriptures while ignoring other valuable sections of the inspired Word of God. How many times do children study Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, and the apostles while bypassing important information and principles? Not that those are not important. They are. But while bypassing other things that are also crucial and essential to understanding the Word of God. Furthermore, switching back and forth between the Old and New Testaments causes some people to think that Moses, David, and Jesus hung out because there's really not a lot of distinction made between what time periods these are and so on. So we want to begin this afternoon by asking a question: what is a Bible school? Now, that may seem like an obvious question, but we want to ask it anyway. What is a Bible school? What are qualifications for teachers? What materials ought to be used to educate children today in a society where there are a number of worldly distractions, such as handheld video games? I don't see anybody holding one now. Cell phones, iPods, and other things. And kids use these a tremendous amount of the time. It can be done, but leaders in the church and in the home must work together to produce a quality education program. Although the answer may seem obvious, again we ask the question, what is the purpose of a Bible school? Well, first of all, as we begin to answer that, we note that the church is losing a large percentage of its young people, and estimates vary between 70% and 90%. Now that's not good, to lose 70 to 90% of our children. Apostates such as Rick Ashley attribute these losses to the church's failure to use instruments of music. Well, that was his rationale. But the attraction that a few may have for that is more of a symptom than the problem itself. It would probably be of value to do research on why these statistics are what they are, and give a lengthy analysis of the problem, along with suggested solutions. But we don't have time to do that all this afternoon. We're only going to take one element of it. And so we're not saying that if you do all of the stuff that's prescribed this afternoon, that'll take care of all your problems. No, because there are other things that enter in. But this is one factor, and it's a very important factor. And I think it's something we could make improvements in and do something about. So we want to notice that there are many things involved in raising young people. And even though we're going to concentrate on the Bible school, I would like to make this point. One of the key ingredients in keeping our young people is that they see their parents and other members of the church living by faith. Not attending services, which is part of that, but living by faith. They need that example. The thing we're going to concentrate, though, most of our time on, is how do we educate people? How do we teach them? How do we get knowledge into their minds? And I like the fact that Jeff is going to follow me, because all the things I leave out he can fill in when he gets up here. And all the mistakes, he can correct those too. But if you doubt that our young people are not as knowledgeable as years past, or even our adults are not as knowledgeable as in years past, just try giving a quiz like this one to your adult class sometime. Don't let them study first. Just ask a number of questions. Where are the 10 Commandments found in the Scriptures? Where's the Sermon on the Mount located in the Bible? Name the 12 tribes of Israel. Name the 12 apostles. List 2 passages that talk about love. List 2 passages that talk about the need for repentance. List 2 passages that show that baptism is essential for salvation. Approximately when do the events of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther occur? Give 2 passages that demonstrate that Christ is deity, the Son of God. Give 2 passages that show that the law of Moses is no longer in effect. State the authority principle as found in the New Testament. Give 2 verses that show that Christ is the only way to come to God the Father. Now, just have people take that and write it down. That's in the book, by the way. These are not difficult questions to answer. Now, there are some difficult questions, like list all of the judges and list all 19 kings of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Now, that might take a while, especially to get them in the proper order. Or, could you quote for me James 2:14 through 26? Now, those would be hard questions. Those are things that we wouldn't really expect everybody to know off the top of their heads, are they? But only the brave would ask the simple questions that we just mentioned and grade the answers. You might want to pack before you do that, because a lot of brethren won't appreciate that. But isn't it odd that we have been teaching fundamental facts like this, and many of these verses that answer these questions are quoted week in and week out in sermons, and yet how many of the members can answer those questions? What's not going on? People are not learning. They'll say, oh yeah, I know that scripture. Where is that? Why don't we know where those are? So again, since we have some who have been in Bible school for 50 years and don't know the answers to these questions, what is the purpose of a Bible school? One wonders how many education directors know what the purpose of a Bible school is. Now, we do not believe in tradition, but we risk falling into various grooves that those before us have established. Most of us are only doing what we do now because of habit involving Bible schools. You've probably heard of the woman who used two pans to bake a ham in the oven, and her husband asked her, why do you do that? And she said, I don't really know. I guess because my mother did that. Well, why did she do it? Well, I don't know. I'll ask her. So she called up her mother and she said, my oven wasn't big enough. So I had to cut it and put it in two pans. Oh, well, our ovens are big enough now. Why aren't we doing it differently? Well, because we've gotten into the habit of just doing things the way we have done them. Likewise, everybody knows that we have Bible classes, but why do we have them? Are they babysitting efforts so the adults can learn? No. Well, why do we have them week in and week out? Have we lost sight of our goals? Of course, everybody knows that we're there to teach the Scriptures, but are we doing it effectively? What specifically do we want students to learn? After they've gone through a year in a class, what did we hope they would learn from that? What do we hope to accomplish in teaching them? Do we just go through our classes perfunctorily, or do we seek to accomplish real goals and measure learning? In large congregations, one man may serve as a full-time educational director. But in churches that have from about 50 to 150 members, maybe even more, one man will handle the selection of the teachers usually and the material. He may be a deacon who's in charge of that. But he usually can only devote so much time to that area of work. He may not take time to evaluate the class material. Frequently, the one in charge spends most of the time making sure that the right amount of material is available for each class on Sundays and Wednesdays, and that there are enough teachers to cover the classes. And that sometimes consists mostly of our educational program. I know at least one deacon who about the week before it was the new quarter would run down to the bookstore and grab some stuff and bring it back and say, here it all is. Well, that's not much preparation. Therefore, our education programs frequently devolve into minimal efforts. And you might hear comments such as, well, we're doing the best we can to get by and are teaching our children some facts. But we may have been saying that for 20 years. Just getting by, I submit, is not sufficient in this area. The purpose of a Bible school should not be to limp through each week, wishing that something better would come along. It should be to educate young people, which includes providing them with facts, but it also involves showing them how to use these facts to relate to each other and building up their faith to live in a hostile world. That's what we ought to be trying to accomplish. Now, those who are entrusted to teach young people must themselves be students of the Word. Many years ago, I knew a man who was I had been studying with about the Lord's church. And finally, one day, he came into work. I was not preaching at the time. I was working in a factory, as was he. And he came in and he said, well, I have just joined a denomination in downtown. And I was pretty discouraged and disheartened. We had had a lot of discussions. And I protested, you've joined a man-made denomination. And he responded by saying, I know, but they have 4,000 members and maybe they'll help me find a job. Well, that was his rationale. A few weeks later he said, guess what? I'm teaching the high school class. And I said, but you don't even know the Bible yourself. And he said, oh, I know. I told the kids when I went into the classroom, I guess I don't want to be here any more than you do, but we're stuck. And he said they thought that was cool. Well, hopefully those who teach in the churches of Christ are a cut above that kind of attitude. But are we as good as we could be? Besides being students of the Word, teachers must set a good example in front of the young people in the congregation, one that they could safely follow. Not only should they be steadfast in their attendance at worship, gospel meetings, lectureships, they should also engage in good works. Morally, they should be above reproach. Above all, teachers must make it their aim to live by faith and be evangelistic toward others. The church, which meets at Forest Park, Georgia, put together a teacher's questionnaire, which our education committee went through, and we made several revisions in it to suit our needs in particular. And that is found in one of the appendixes in the book, or you may have picked one up off the table. We're going to look at a couple of things in here. But let me mention this first. If any of the questions are answered incorrectly, someone on the committee will discuss with this person that particular answer to get clarification of, well, did you mean to say false when you should have said true, or whatever? And then, well, what is your reasoning? If someone argues in favor of the use of alcohol, for example, or smoking cigarettes or immodest dress, we will ask them, could you explain this a little bit further? And then once we've done that, if they are persistent and consistent with what they put on the questionnaire, we will next ask, are you open to study this issue? And if they're not, then we will say, well, I'm sorry, but we cannot use you at this time in our educational system. If you want to study these things, then we will take the time to go over them, and maybe we can arrive at some agreement. But children should not grow up receiving mixed messages where the preacher is saying one thing and the teacher is saying something else, if it's based on the Word of God. You can see there are different types of questions we ask. Number one is, I understand 2 Timothy 3:16 and Hebrews 1:1 and 2 to mean that the 66 books of the Bible are inspired words from God and are the only authoritative source of religious direction. Number two, I understand Exodus 20:11 to mean that God created everything in the known universe in 6 literal 24-hour days. Number three, I understand Genesis 7:21 to mean that God destroyed every human being and land animal on the earth by a flood, except Noah and his family and what was saved by the ark. The last three on the page, I understand that there is only one church. I understand, number 8, that denominationalism is not authorized in the New Testament and is therefore sinful. Number 9, I understand singing is authorized in New Testament worship and that instrumental music lacks authority. And then there are several more listed on the next page. Then we have a section of moral questions. Number 2, do you believe Christians should avoid using profane words? Number 3, is it right for a Christian to dance in public? Number 4, do you think Christians can engage in mixed swimming? Number 5 asks about other forms of immodest dress. And then there are commitment questions like the one at the bottom of the page. Do you think a Christian should attend every worship service of the church or of the congregation that is possible? How is it going to look if our teachers come Sunday morning and then don't come back till the next Sunday morning? What kind of an example is that going to be? So our teachers should be doctrinally sound, morally sound, and committed to the work of the local church. And so that's the questionnaire then that we hand to teachers. Next, we want to talk about Bible school materials. And this is in the book, but this is the formatting for a book. You just don't get to print it like this. So I made some available for a lesson on the golden calf. And in case some of the ladies for smaller children want to look at some of the things that are done, here's a little package you can look at but not keep, or I'm in big trouble with my wife. But you're welcome to look at them. So these are lessons that we use, and for decades, many brethren have been lamenting the lack of decent education material. I've been one of them. In fact, I've talked to a number of people. Do you know any good educational material? And most people say, no, but we sure need some. So we have material, but it's not of the best quality. In the 90s, Daryl and Ruth Hansen of Stephenville, Texas, spent a great deal of time researching materials by various publishing houses, including the Gospel Advocate, and discovered that the majority of them were using materials prepared by Baptists and Presbyterians. How many of you saw their display? Some of you have, haven't you? Quite a few of you have. Good. The cover of each quarterly book would be different than the ones the denominations were using, but the contents were basically the same. And I suppose those listed as editors actually just went through the denominational books and substituted a word or a phrase when some denominational word or phrase was used. But except for those few changes, churches of Christ were basically teaching the same lessons as those in denominations. How shameful. But unfortunately, the alternatives have not been very great. Well, about 2 years ago, I attended an education workshop. Didn't know what it was going to have, but it was interesting to attend. It was taught by Neil Pollard, who presented the material from his congregation, the Cold Harbor Road Church of Christ in Mechanicsville, Virginia. And they had all of a 5-year program available on a single disc. They probably still do, free of charge. Well, the price was right. So I got one, and we've been using it ever since. They have a 5-year program which covers the entire Bible, and I made a proposal in our business meeting that we begin using that in our congregation. And we started Labor Day 2000, or the week after Labor Day, 2005. Now, I have reworked that material entirely. And I'll tell you why. It needed to be reworked. It just demanded it. No, they did a fairly decent job of putting things together, but some of the changes were formatting changes. Some of them, there was too much material in one lesson, with apologies to them, For example, Exodus 18 through 24 was in one lesson, and that includes the Ten Commandments. Well, that's way too much material to have for kids to absorb. So we broke that one up into 3 lessons. And so I have about 10 more lessons than what they have at the same point in what they have done. Also, occasionally there were inaccuracies. And I'm sure they didn't do that intentionally, but they were there. And so we've removed most of those that occasionally something still gets through. We've got to go through it again. But scriptures were added to each section so that the student could find the pertinent passages as he studied. In theirs, there are no scriptures in each one of these sections. It's just in there somewhere. So we took the time and the trouble to go through and put passage by passage what this paragraph is dealing with. And so literally there have been hundreds of hours spent in revising all of this, and probably will be hundreds more. But here is a sample lesson on the golden calf. Each one has a title which is pretty much descriptive of what's in the lesson. And then there are 1 or 2 probably memory verses. In this case, what was chosen was Exodus 32:19 and also 26. That was another thing. They have several verses that are suggested, but sometimes they just didn't capture a real crucial or key point. These are designed to do that. We have Moses' reaction as he came near the camp and he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. You might possibly need to know where that is sometime if you're talking with someone on a particular topic. And then the other one, the one that impresses me, is Moses saying, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, let him come to me." Very dramatic pronouncement and request on his part. So we choose some of the best verses that make excellent points, or points that could be used to discuss with other people as those memory verses. Then we have a couple of key points to look for in the course of the lesson. God must come first in our lives. Obviously, in this section, that was not the case. They had put self above God quickly while Moses was up on the mountain. And the second point is disobedience to God will be punished. And of course, in this case, it was immediate. And that's something for children to be aware of. Then there's usually an outline. The outline is usually a little longer than this one. We have one point here because it takes up the whole 3 chapters. And most of the lessons have between 2 and 4 chapters, occasionally 5. But we don't want too much material. And then the rest of the lesson, well, not the rest, but a great portion of the lesson deals with the facts. And we begin the adult class, and by the way, from 6th grade on up, we all use these and pass them out to the students. Prior to that, the teachers decide how they want to compose the lesson and present it to the student. But from 6th grade on up, we all use this very same sheets, these sheets. Moses was on Mount Sinai with God 40 days. During this time, the Israelites decided something must have happened to Moses, and they impatiently went to Aaron requesting him to make them a tangible God. He made no argument, but told Israel to bring him their gold earrings, from which he created a golden calf. Aaron told them this was the God that brought them out of Egypt. He built an altar before this idol and set aside the next day as a day of feasting. And then, as I'm teaching the adult class, if there are comments, we'll pause. If not, we'll go on. And maybe after every 2 or 3 points, we'll pause. And so far, the classes have been very cooperative in not getting off on a tangent because they know we have this much material to cover. So it's, we can't spend 30 minutes on some peripheral issue, which sometimes happens in Bible classes. All right, then there are discussion questions. which they can do after class as reminders, or if we have time, we occasionally get to these. And then we also have, and this was provided on the disc that we got, an assortment of visual aid ideas, songs that will go with the lesson for the little children, and activities. Now this doesn't get handed out in 6th through adult grades, but it is handed out to the teachers of the smaller groups. And there are several activities there that are suggested. Now, ahead of time, we hand out about 6 lessons or 7 to the teachers so that they have in advance what they need to prepare. Once this is all finished, we could put it in a book and the teachers would have it a year in advance, but we're doing it on the fly, so to speak. So they have 6 to 7 weeks of material at a time that we give them, and that way they know what they're going to be doing, and they can prepare for that adequately. We don't have the luxury of having it all bound yet, but we hope to do that after we get through the 5 years. Now, we notice that we do have, and this is perhaps the greatest criticism that could be leveled, is that, well, there's no visual aids. You know, that's what teachers of young kids always say. There's no visual aids. So we understand that, but since the teachers have this ahead of time, they can pool their resources. They can talk about what might be a good idea. If there are 2 teachers in a class, they can discuss it, or the whole department can discuss it. And if you don't have a stockpile room, an educational resource room, that would be handy to have so that all of these things can be developed ahead of time. But it is working, and our teachers have found ways to use this material and teach these lessons so we know that it can be done. So students from 2 to 3 years of age on up all study the same lesson. Now, nobody walks into the 2s and 3 classroom and says, Moses was on, you know, they're not going to understand this, so it has to be dumbed down for their age group. But when it is, it's very effective. Well, maybe dumbed down is not not the best choice. Put on their own level, shall we say. And then the children get it very quickly. And of course, there's some matter that's not appropriate for children. Some texts are, you want to leave that part out for kids and dwell on some other aspect of that lesson. But everybody is studying the same basic time period in the Bible as we go through from week to week. Everybody, all the way up on Sunday and Wednesday, because there's enough material in here to last Sunday and Wednesday. So you don't have to worry about ordering material this time and all of that. And that way the teachers can work together in greater concert also, because they're working on the same basic lessons Sunday morning and Wednesday night. Oh, I'm not going to have a lot of time left over? Okay, I thought I'd have a few minutes left over, but apparently not. All right, you can look at all of that in the book. The great advantage is that the whole family is not only being taught this, but can review this. We have a set of rings with key cards with facts on them, and it only takes a couple of minutes at dinner, 3 or 4 nights a week, or a family devotional. And everybody can then have that material more firmly in mind, rather than just going to a lesson and mom and dad, say, "What'd you learn today?" Typical response is, "Oh, I don't know," and or "We learned about Moses," or something like that. This way, everybody, the whole family, is learning it together, and it's reinforced, and the material is reinforced. The Bible is presented chronologically, rather than skipping back and forth in the New Testament Wednesday night, Old Testament Sunday morning, and all of that. The whole thing is set out in chronological order. Other advantages of this system include the teachers knowing basically what they're going to be doing the next 5 years once you begin it. They don't have to wonder, where are we going to be? What are we going to be doing? Here it is. This is where we are. This is where we're going to be. And that's a somewhat of a comfort as to opposed to just, well, here's your material. Now do this for the next 13 weeks. It's easier to keep in mind where the class has been and where it is going, rather than using thematic studies that skip around and cover the same material oftentimes. The students will have a better overall idea of a Bible chronology and how things fit together. Although the congregation will not be paying for educational literature, which, if you haven't noticed, is quite expensive, they will be spending time doing stuff like this, running off copies. So there is an expense, but it's not going to be as much as buying educational material. Jeff will be talking next hour about how to more firmly get some of this material into our minds for practical use. Brethren, have an idea of the importance of the Bible school. Many times we schedule dinners of appreciation for teachers, and we should. Many times congregations have an annual Bible school drive, and there's nothing wrong with that. But while we are doing these things, we need to ask, are we doing things that are really going to impact the direction of the congregation? The emphasis that is needed is a strong, solid educational program now, not something that we'll get to someday. We have the opportunity to make improvements. With the computer flashcard system that Jeff will discuss, the Bible school material that actually teaches the Bible chronologically, and a questionnaire that discovers the beliefs of the teachers and makes sure that they're in harmony with the leadership of the congregation, we have specific tools to move ahead. Some congregations may already be fully satisfied with what they have and what they're using, but in discussions with a lot of preachers, I find that they are very disappointed and lamenting the way that things have been as far as what's available. It lies within the realm of possibility, I believe, to save 70 to 90% of our young people rather than losing them. Of course, other factors have a bearing in the outcome, such as the faithfulness of the parents, the friends of the student, their own inclinations, but the knowledge that is needed to fight against Satan is fundamental and critical. Let's not let our students, our children, our young people be destroyed for a lack of knowledge.